Conor McGregor versus Max Holloway is now official. It will be the UFC 329 International Fight Week main event. And this has been a matchup that's been rumored for a little while now. And admittedly, when I first, kind of heard this fight floated, I wasn't super excited. And now that it's been announced, officially scheduled, I honestly think I'm pretty out on this matchup. And so I kind of just want to talk through this fight, kind of give my opinion. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments. I will start off by saying just getting Conor McGregor back in the octagon is a huge win. Seeing him compete in pretty much any martial art is obviously must-see TV. He is the biggest star in MMA history. So if it's this fight or nothing, I'd obviously rather see him compete, regardless of who it's against. But man, I'm just not a huge fan of this matchup. And the way that I'm kind of reading this whole situation, it's been reported that the UFC have kind of tried to lock up Conor McGregor long term. We've seen them do this over the last few years with some of the bigger stars. John Jones, I want to say, signed an 8-fight deal in 2023. He is clearly regretting that now that he wants to fight Francis outside the UFC. They're not going to let him out of that contract. Believe they've signed recent long-term extensions with Alex Pereira, Charles Oliveira, with number of fights that those guys are probably not going to reach, pretty much locking them into the UFC for the rest of their career and probably limiting their opportunities once they do retire or potentially want to move on, to chase other opportunities. And it seems like Conor McGregor does not want to be locked down. Makes sense because I'm sure he could make a ton of money doing some other things, whether it's boxing, MMA under a different banner. He kind of wants that freedom. And so it feels like because he does not want that long-term extension, the UFC isn't going to give him any favors, and they're not going to give him a super winnable matchup. We have to remember 2 years ago, Conor McGregor was coming off a 3-year layoff booked against Michael Chandler. Now on a 5-year layoff, he is booked against a much tougher opponent in Max Holloway. To me, that just doesn't make a ton of sense. I thought the Michael Chandler fight, really worked because it was winnable. You could see a path to Conor, getting the dub there. Obviously, Chandler had been more active, but it's not like he had been a world beater. He's got this entertaining style, but he's going to be reckless. He's going to leave openings for Conor. And so I think the matchup made a lot of sense. It does not make sense now to go from Michael Chandler to just an infinitely tougher test in Max Holloway with even, a longer layoff, an older version of Conor McGregor. And I understand there's going to be a lot of people that, just hear the name Conor McGregor. He has that name value. We obviously know at his peak, he is a, fantastic fighter. And so people might just want to blindly believe in him. And obviously he has a puncher's chance, but there's no way to frame this as if it's not a mismatch for Conor McGregor here. Max Holloway has been actively competing and having success against some of the best guys in the world. I mean, pretty much his entire career, but even just as of late over the last few years, now up at 155, his last 2 wins have come against Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. Now this matchup is taking place up at 170, but I don't really think that's a huge swing for Max Holloway here. I don't think the size difference is going to be crazy between these guys. And then I guess maybe you have some optimism because Max Holloway's coming off a tough performance against Charles Oliveira. Maybe that's how you pitch it as, it's actually going to be competitive. To me, that Charles Oliveira loss means nothing because nothing that Oliveira implemented in that fight is something that Conor McGregor can implement against Max Holloway. Conor McGregor is not going to take Charles Oliveira down and hold him there and land a bunch of elbows. It's just not going to happen. So you can pretty much throw that fight away. You look at how Max Holloway looked against Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje. That's the version of Max Holloway you are going to be getting in this matchup. And then once again, just looking at McGregor in this stage of his career, he will turn 38 years old, I believe 3 days after the fight against Max Holloway. He is coming off a 5-year layoff. He had a brutal ankle/leg injury in his last UFC fight. And then even his last 2 fights, did not go his way. He was finished in his last 2 fights in the UFC. His last win was back in 2020 against a pretty washed Cowboy Cerrone. His second most recent win is all the way back in 2016. And so once again, it shouldn't be competitive on paper. And that's not even getting into the fact that just stylistically, this is pretty much a nightmare matchup for Conor. Now, I guess the biggest nightmare would just be a dominant grappler. But if we're going to kind of build in a lab the worst striking matchup for Conor McGregor, it would be Max Holloway with the crazy durability and then the crazy cardio. We saw that with Nate Diaz, right? Where Diaz could take all of Conor McGregor's best shots and he's still going to be there. He is still going to be pushing the pace in the championship rounds. And now you just get a way better version of that in Max Holloway, who also has the crazy durability, but has the absurd cardio and is also just a way more technically clean striker than Nate Diaz. And I also think, less hittable than Nate in this matchup. And you look at the betting odds, Max Holloway is currently a minus 550 favorite. That's tied for the second largest main event favorite of 2026. That is tied with Kevin Vallejos versus Josh Emmett, like a top prospect versus kind of washed veteran matchup. And then the, highest or the biggest favorite in a main event is Ilia Topuria against Justin Gaethje. So that's, kind of the company this matchup is in just in terms of expected competitiveness. It truly feels like Conor McGregor's only legit path to victory is just landing one huge left hand early on against Holloway. And could that happen? Sure. But it does seem pretty unlikely. And yeah, Conor hits hard. His timing is great, but it's not like he's got this touch of death like Ilia Topuria power where even if he clips Holloway, Holloway's recoverability has still been really good up at 185. And then maybe you can make the case if it is a 3-rounder. I don't think it's been confirmed whether it's 5 rounds or 3 rounds, but man, Holloway can still push a crazy pace in a 3-round fight and can still pull away, in a shorter fight, even if those championship rounds aren't there. And so I just feel like fans are not trying to tune in to see Conor McGregor just get lit up in a matchup. And I do think this is truly the first booking of Conor McGregor's career where there shouldn't be a lot of belief in him being able to get the job done. He's certainly had tough matchups, right? Even the last 2 fights against Poirier, he took a year off after the Cerrone fight, still hadn't been super active. That's a really tough fight to return to. Coming off the boxing win, he's returning against Khabib. He has had a lot of tough tests. This one, I just think in his stage of his career, is a really, really tough ask for him to be competitive in. And I just felt like there were better options out there. You should have been looking for a high-profile name and a winnable matchup. And to me, the clear ones were the Nate Diaz trilogy and then a potential Jorge Masvidal matchup. I know Nate Diaz didn't look very good in his most recent matchup, yesterday, a couple of days ago, whenever you're watching this, against Mike Perry, and Jorge Masvidal really didn't look great towards the end of his UFC run. But this is the company that Conor McGregor should be in right now, right? He's going to be 38 years old, long layoff, hasn't had much recent success, just recent in terms of his most recent MMA fights. This is not close to a prime version of Conor McGregor. And we saw Nate Diaz get roughed up by Mike Perry. Does Conor look better than what Mike Perry looked like in that matchup? Maybe, but I don't know. He clearly hasn't been locked in training this entire time. It's not like he's been in the gym preparing for this return for forever. He's been kind of all over the place on social media. And then even if you wanted to go the Jorge Masvidal route, because he hasn't looked as rough, in his post-UFC career, I still think that would have been a much better option. It just seems like a big fumble. We're never going to get that, Diaz-McGregor trilogy. And then the Jorge fight was there early on in COVID. The UFC passed on it. I think that has, kind of turned out to be a pretty huge mistake. Also, this is just kind of related to the matchup. I might do a longer video on this, but Conor McGregor, biggest star in MMA history, probably the biggest, return from a long layoff in MMA history, at least in terms of notoriety. I'd throw GSP up there in terms of impactful ones. But Dana White makes this announcement just despite Francis Ngannou. During Francis Ngannou's walkout, Dana White goes live on Instagram during the fight night like some whack Apex card. Great main event. Shout out to Arnold Allen. But that was a super weak card just despite Francis. Biggest star in the history of the sport. And he's just so petty he can't do a legit announcement. He has to try to spite Francis. Because of that, I would like to give Francis Ngannou a shout out during this video. Dana wanted to lessen his shine. Shout out to Francis. Big knockout win against Felipe Lins. Should be fighting John Jones next, but we know the UFC isn't going to make that happen. I'll probably have a longer video on that also. And then I guess my last kind of big point here is, what are the UFC really even gaining here with Holloway winning this fight? Like, I might disagree with it. I might think it's scummy, promoting, kind of scummy from the UFC if they're trying to kill off Conor McGregor because he doesn't want to extend with them. But even if that's the premise we're operating under, why are they choosing Max Holloway to do that? Like, Holloway's already a really big star. He's 34 years old. I think he has very limited champ upside at this point in his career. I think you certainly could have made the case once Ilya moves up, maybe he could get that belt. The way he was dominated on the ground by Charles Oliveira, I don't think he's beating Oliveira. I don't think he's beating Arman Sarukian. I just don't see him getting to that belt. So what's really the upside here? I think there were better options, like entertainment, building up a star, continuing to build up a star. Like, I think McGregor versus Paddy Pimblett honestly makes way more sense. And then if you wanted to really push someone else over the edge, a Carlos Prates, Michael Morales. I mean, I think those guys completely kill Conor McGregor. I think it would be egregious matchmaking, but if you're already going to do egregious, unfair matchmaking, do it for a guy who hasn't gotten that, full push yet from the promotion. And I think it would have made more sense to do Prates or Morales. And so overall, good to see Conor back. I hope he actually steps in there. That's still all the way up in the air, but I just don't like that it feels like the goal is to kill off Conor McGregor here. This should not be a competitive fight. Maybe Max Holloway makes a mistake and gets caught. I just think it's unlikely. And so overall, the matchup, not super interesting to me, but would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Am I being too negative? Do you guys disagree? Do you think this is competitive? Let me hear it in the comments. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.